Thanks for the nice introduction. I do appreciate it. I agreed to be filmed, but I didn't realize how disconcerting it was having a camera right there. So if I suddenly grimace or make weird faces or do something really embarrassing, then I don't have to be blamed. It's just because there's an object right there. I usually don't like being on book, but I am going to be largely from my notes here, just in the interest of time, because I know it's been a long day, and I timed this that it would be about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions, and I may actually skip over some stuff too, just to, because brevity is, I don't know, somebody told me it was a soul of wit or something, I don't remember. So the question is, what do we do now, right? We've been talking about stories all day. You guys have been working on stories probably for a long time. So what the heck do we do now? We've written, we've revised, we've revised, we've grown ideas like garden crops and nurtured them like children. We've studied narrative structure and heroes' journeys and deconstructed meta-narratives and character and anti-heroes and child development and the poetics of the narrative beat. I totally just made that up. I do that sometimes. And in any case, none of it answers the central question. What do we do now that we have this idea? What do we do now that we have this story? Now that we possess this story? How do I make this story whole, right? How do I make it as a thing unto itself so that I can gift that wholeness to someone else? Because that's the point, right? That's the point. We're supposed to give the story to somebody else. It's not just for us. We offer our stories as raw material to the reader, and the reader then uses that, right? The reader makes the story. The reader builds the story. We just give them stuff to do that. And the reason why is that they take that story and they use it as a light to shine into the unknown, right? Or they take that story as medicine, as an antidote to fear. Or they take that story and they build it into a map into places and experiences that are other to them. Or they take that story and they use it to wipe the grime off the surface of the soul so that they can finally see themselves clearly, right? This is the beauty of stories. This is the beauty of being a human being. That's the same thing, you know. Our humanity is a narrative construction. When we change the narrative, we change a life. When we change the narrative, we change a mind. And when we change the narrative, we change the world. That's why this work matters. That's why we're here. So I have a lot of things that I wanted to say and to communicate and to put a little bit of structure on that, and also to kind of limit myself because I tend to go on tangents a lot. My kids will tell you that. I wanted to actually make use of you guys. So what I need is 5 volunteers. I just want you to come up, unroll your scroll, and read it, and then you can put it up here. You may have to roll it backwards because otherwise it's going to fall down. I didn't totally think this through, but I was really close. All right, so they're numbered. So will the bearer of scroll number 1 please approach the podium? That's you. All right, come on up. No, it's on the other side. Yeah. So yeah, just come on up. So just read, will you just read that to the group here?
Agitation gives birth to creation.
Perfect. You're amazing. Thank you. Agitation gives birth to creation. This is the thing that I want you to know. 1 second. You guys can do this for me next time. Agitation gives birth to creation. The thing that bothers you is the thing that is requiring you to take notice. Agitation is not simply an effect of annoyance, but it is actually the storytelling part of your brain gearing itself up to tell you something. These words I actually have taped up on the wall of or the door of my office, and I sort of give it a little pat every time I go in. Agitation gives birth to creation. Our job then is to follow where that agitation leads us. I actually have a story to tell you about this. Once upon a time, when I was a young green writer, I wrote a novel that I wasn't going to sell in a million years. Okay, maybe 1 billion. But I'm still really proud of it. I still really like that story. I like the characters. I like the fundamental politics that are stitching its way through the whole narrative. I love the musculature of it. I love it that the main character is basically a stand-in for 24-year-old me. I never get to write about 24-year-old me. And she was fun and weird, and I like fun, weird things. Anyway, I queried that novel to like 1 million agents, and everybody said no. Some said no kindly, some said no less kindly, and some said no with stony silence, like the way a mountain says no. Anyway, it wasn't going to sell, so I was trying to figure out what to do next. And so I did what I always do when I don't know what to write next. I went for a run. And this is where the story gets interesting. As I ran, I was suddenly assaulted by an image of a boy sitting in the backseat of a rental car driving through Iowa. I'm not a visual thinker. I don't know how many of you have brains that are built like mine, but I don't think in pictures at all. If you ask me to picture something in my head, like the movie screen or whatever that you guys do, I can't really do that. If I can, it's very difficult. It's usually dark or fuzzy or very far away, even for things that are very important to me, my own children even. It's very, very hard for me to call up an image of their faces in my brain. I really like them, though. They're really awesome. But it just is, it doesn't happen very often for me, except every once in a while. Every once in a while, I'll get an image that is so clear that it actually hurts. When that happens, when a crisp, immediate image erupts in my brain, I pay attention. In this case, I didn't really have much of a choice. The image of this boy that happened while I was running, it was an agitation. For those of us who tend towards image blindness, having a clear image assaulting the imagination is not pleasant. The colors were so vivid that they stung. The sheen of the vinyl dashboard had an oiliness that seeped onto my very skin. I couldn't shake it. I could feel it sticking to me the way bare legs stick on fake leather seats. And that kid's loneliness, my God. He was so lonely. So that image was an agitation. That image was my call to adventure, like in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. This was my own hero's journey. And like the hero's journey, my adventure would not take no for an answer. My path was set. The image cut a hole in the fabric of the world and insisted that I follow. And so I did. Agitation gives birth to creation. Take notice of the things that bother you, because usually they mean something, okay? Okay, next rule, number 2. Oh, awesome, and you already, excellent. Would you like to read it to the group?
You are a wild, glorious, magical super genius. Now go act like one.
Thank you so much. I wanted to add sexy as well, but I thought that was inappropriate at a children's conference. Thank you. Let's see if it sticks up. If not, then maybe I should, no, this is gonna work. Awesome. You are a wild, glorious, magical super genius. Now act like one. I don't really have a ton of things to say about this. I just thought you should know. And also, I wanted to just add some fuel to your creative engines. When you sit down to write a story, you're making a goddamn world, right? That's amazing. You're inventing people. That's so cool. Real people with histories and predilections and biases and brokenness and weird talents. You're creating power dynamics that where none existed before. You're building magical structures and substrates. You're inventing religions. You're breaking hearts. You're making a reader care about a bunny, or a toy clown, or a horse who wishes she was faster, caring enough to make that parent read that book 1,000 times. Okay, this is no small feat. None of this is small. What you're doing is not small. You're giving somebody the tools to fix their own brokenness. Stories do this. This is important. You are wild and glorious and magical, and you are a genius every day. I think you should take it seriously. Next scroll, number 3. Who has number 3? Oh, thank you. Would you like to read it to the group?
Every journey needs a map, and sometimes also a guide.
Thank you. So nice to see you, by the way. Gosh, I know so many people here. It's so fun. Every journey needs a map. Now, I'm an ex-park ranger, so I'm all about the 10 essentials, and one of those 10 essentials is the map. You need to have a map to know where you're going, right? And whether you're talking about the path to publication or the path to story dissemination or just story completion, finding the map that's going to give you the lay of the land and help you chart your course is crucial. And I'm not talking about plotter versus pantser. That debate is kind of tiresome to me. What I am talking about is that, that we need to have something that is going to help us chart our course, okay? We can't do this alone. We can't do this alone. So sometimes the map that we use is found in the canon of stories that come before us, right? Fairy tales or songs or novels or short stories or dance or sagas or puppetry or visual art. These maps explore territories, both real and imagined, and have done the heavy lifting of documenting these landscapes of the heart. They've been doing this for a long time, right? We've been telling stories for a long time. One thing I really like to tell kids when I go and talk to kids about writing stories is that one cool thing about storytelling is that we've been doing it since before we had language, right? The parts of our brain that are involved in storytelling are actually older than the language centers that, and so, our original stories were told in song. Singing is actually older than language. Our old stories were told in dance and rhythm. Both dance and rhythm making are older than language. We invented language so that we could tell stories more efficiently and effectively. And then we figured out about writing that language down, and so those stories could stay and they could outlive us, and that's really exciting, right? And so what that means is that, that sort of old adage of like you have to be a really, you have to be a big reader in order to be in order to improve as a writer. That's so true, and it's hard to hear because we hear it so often. But the fact is that these stories are maps for us. These are this is what allows us to know what our landscape is, right? These all stories are built on stories. All stories feed us, right? So pay attention to the stories that built us because they're going to show you where to go. Another map is the language of dreams. Okay, I'm actually a big believer in listening to dreams. More than once, a central truth of what I'm writing, the thing that I allowed myself to be blind to, revealed itself in a dream. Pay attention to your dreams. Your brain has many parts, and some of those bits speak more quietly than others. Okay, so pay attention to dreams. Sometimes the maps that we use are the maps that we make ourselves, stepping outside of the story for a minute and trying to get the lay of the land. This is important too. As far as guides go, the people here, these are the people that are going to help guide you. Your writing group, your beta readers, even the people that we teach outside, the people that we bring our story to, that we teach. These are people who can guide our writing further. Okay, so either the student who breaks our assumptions, right? That person's a guide. The beta reader who says, yeah, boy, oh boy, did you ever mess this up, right? That person's a guide too. And the writing group who does not allow you to give up on a story and bullies you into not erasing it forever, not that I have any experience with that, those are guides as well, right? You don't have to do this blindfolded. You don't. You don't have to fumble in the dark. Use the resources available to you. Chart your course and get going. Scroll number 4. Would you like to read that?
Sure. Fear is useful, so is discomfort.
Okay. This is where I disagree, actually, with our first speaker today, because I am actually a big believer in fear. I'm a big believer in fear. Fear is so useful. A few years ago, I was teaching up in Carlstad, Minnesota, which is about 20 miles south of the Canadian border. And it's a tiny school in a tiny town. How small was it? Well, I was staying in the only motel in town that was also the town's only notary public, and the town's only gas station, and the town's only liquor store. This was a problem because while I was there, it was bear hunting season. It's a funny thing coming to your tiny Toyota early in the morning and seeing it sandwiched between 2 trucks with dead bears lashed into the beds. It also meant that it was hard for people to call me because the liquor store does a lot of business during bear season. And this was a problem because my agent was trying to tell me that my book sold and she couldn't call me for 3 days. Anyway, each day after spending the morning and early afternoon with 7th graders, I drove out to a nearby state park and went for a run. There's nobody there. It was October, and so the front booth was closed for the season, and there was a thin layer of snow covering all of the trails. And I just would go out there and I would run and explore, and just feeling that sort of rhythm of my own body, feeling the rhythm of breath, feeling the rhythm of my feet on the trail. And then I saw it staring at me. It was a cougar, full grown, about as close to me as you are, actually. I looked at it, and it looked at me, its tail lashing back and forth and back and forth. Earlier in my life, I had been a park ranger at Olympic National Park, and I was no stranger to wildness, and I wasn't easily scared, but cougars scare the hell out of me. And so the lion pressed its ears back, it took 2 steps forward, it showed its teeth. And so I raised my hands over my head, I bared my teeth back, and I howled as loud as I could. It was enough to scare it. One thing about cougars is that they kind of live on the razor's edge as far as their calories in, calories out. They don't really go after, they're loath to fight, and they don't really care about calories that they have to work for. Even still, the creature was gone, but I was terrified. Oh my gosh, I was terrified. I ran back to the car, knowing that any moment I could feel a sharp knock against the back of my neck, knowing that there was a distinct possibility that I was right now being stalked by a creature who was bigger than me and tougher than me and faster than me and who liked attacking from behind. Didn't happen. I was fine. But I went back to my motel room and wrote a good 10,000 words in Iron-Hearted Violet. The words just poured out. They were conceived in fear and birthed in fear. Fear, I feel, is incredibly useful in making fiction. So you need to ask yourself, what is it that you fear the most? Face it. That's my suggestion. Face it and then sit down with it and live with it. Learn how to tolerate it and then write stories. Your readers are scared too. Of course they are. Childhood is scary. It's really scary. If you are able to access that point of fear, to face it with open eyes and steady hands, then you will similarly be able to hold your reader's hand, guide them through the mouth of fear, and help them to come out the other side. Scroll number 5.
Magic exists in unexpected places.
Thank you. I love your accent, by the way. Magic exists in unexpected places. I'm just gonna roll this. I really hope that doesn't fall. Here's the thing. I believe in magic. I do. I believe in a lot of things. My life is built on dreams, signs, and wonders. Part of that, I think, is just basic wiring. I am this person, and I believe a lot of stuff. And part of that, I think, comes from a childhood in which magical things seemed to happen. Things felt magical. When a perfectly ordinary object could transform both itself and everyone around it, where a piece of paper can feel like a miracle. I'd like to tell you a story. When I was in 7th grade, my beloved and wonderful godfather took his own life. His wife was pregnant with their 7th child, and because it was a suicide, she was not eligible to collect their life insurance. My godfather was a giant of a man, barrel-chested with a huge and ready laugh. He loved his wife, he loved his family, he loved everyone, but he had this secret darkness. And one day, the darkness won. The thing about my godfather, though, is, and of course, in retrospect now, we understand that it was a case of undiagnosed bipolar disorder, one that was well hidden from everyone, including himself, probably. But at the time, we just saw it as idiosyncrasies. We saw them as delightful little oddities that made him the magnificent human being that he was. For example, he loved chopping wood by hand. God, all the time, amassing enough to fill a garage 3 times over and piling the lot of it in the field behind the barn. The pile, incidentally, was actually bigger than the barn. My godmother thanked God every day that they lived in the country because cities frown on that sort of thing. For example, he decided randomly to teach himself to throw the discus, and started designing and constructing a discus court to exacting Olympic specifications in the other field behind the house. He took both his training and the construction of the discus court with a seriousness and fanaticism that kept him occupied for a couple of seasons. The thing was perfect. His form was perfect. He chucked that disc deep into the trees. For example, one day he arrived home with a truck bearing 10 pallets piled high with package after package of paper. My aunt stared at it, open-mouthed. "What on earth have you done?" she said. "Cotton bond paper," he announced with a flourish and a deep-throated laugh. It was pennies on the dollar. "We shall never want for paper again." My aunt shook her head. Where on earth were you planning on putting it?" "The basement, of course," he said, and he set out for the downstairs to clear out a space. There was so much paper that it filled the small storeroom in the back from floor to ceiling. There was nothing but paper. My aunt was incensed. "That paper will outlive us," she said. She was half right. 2 months later, he went to the back of the woodshed and made a brief and brutal exit from the world. After he died, she was close to penniless. She made do. The rest of the family offered to help. She would hear none of it. Her 7th child was born, a boy. If my godfather had been there, he would have swallowed the baby in hunter orange and cradled him in his giant hands and displayed him to the hospital halls and nursing stations and the lobbies. "Look," he would have said, my son, my little son." Instead, my aunt nursed her son alone while her other children slept at their cousins' houses. And still she would take nothing. Christmas time arrived. With its headaches and bluster and oppressive need, my parents, aunts, and uncles all offered to pay for gifts, to replenish her bank account, to do something. She refused. All alone, she stared at her empty balance and fussed. On Christmas Eve, as the children slept, my aunt was a wreck. She paced and cried. She screamed at her husband. She hit the walls. And upstairs, the children dreamed and dreamed. Here's the thing about my aunt. She's a gifted artist. Give her a piece of paper and an X-Acto knife, and she will create these beautiful, delicate silhouettes that will take your breath away. Whimsical and bold, a brave breath of object and nugget of space, of light and dark and everything beyond. They are a marvel. She went into the basement and hauled up a couple reams of paper and set to work. When the children woke, the house was filled with angels. There were large angels and angels so small that they rested on breakfast spoons. They covered the trees, the chair, and the couch. They crowded the floor. They cascaded down the stairs. The world inside that house was alive with halos and feathers and wings. It was a magic, blessed snow. Later, my father and uncles arrived with armloads of gifts and baskets of delicacies and steaming food covered in covered pots. They opened the doors, they called out their ho-ho-hos and their Merry Christmases. And what they found was a house full of children, their mouths hushed and solemn, their eyes large and bright and shining. My aunt was fast asleep on the couch. "Do you see?" my cousin said in a glittering whisper. "Do you see? It's magic." And they meant magic. But they didn't only mean magic. They also meant hope. They also meant wonder. They also meant my dad. And oh, yes, even when he's not here, he is here, he is here, he is still here. To be honest, I've written stories with magic in them ever since. When I write stories, I write about a world that is strange and erratic and esoteric and broken and grieving and wild. I write about a world that exists to be bent, a world that is begging to be changed. Sometimes you need to see the world as it isn't in order to see it as it is. For the kid reader, magic is as real as math. It's as universal as the merciless dodgeball games. It's one of the many rules dictating the treacherous landscape of friendship and family and love and loss and spelling tests and loyalty and endless push-ups in gym and the long walk to the principal's office and the odd smell of elementary school hallways and icy playgrounds in winter. Magic is a tool and a useful one. And we don't believe in it, not really. Except when we do, and then we do. I'm actually going to skip ahead because I want to actually have some time open for questions because I think you guys probably do have some questions. But what I do want to say in the midst of all this is children's books are amazing. This work is amazing. And I am in the midst of, I'm not writing a lot right now because I'm in the midst of parenting a child through a very dark time. And I am noticing the power of children's books, not only for her, but for me too. I noticed it because I kept thinking about reading the Never-Ending Story when I was a kid, and that moment when Atreyu and Artax are going across the swamps of sadness, and Artax becomes subsumed by that sadness and starts to sink, and that Atreyu is holding on to. That desperate, yearning cry, that was the sound that my heart was making. And I realized that I learned about that. I learned how to understand that because of a children's book. Similarly, I was thinking about J.K. Rowling J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter and both the first and the second book in a terrible, terrible state of depression. And so when she wrote the third book, she made depression a character as the Dementors, right? That's what the Dementors are. They're depression. And to have that in a children's book and to be able to see that in a totally different way, but also to be able to identify with Madame Pomfrey, who super knows what to do, right? And that became a link for me. But it's also a link for my child, too, who is now obsessively reading children's books. She has reread every single one of Pete Hopman's books. She has reread every single one of the Harry Potter books. She has reread every single one of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Diana Wynne Jones and Christopher Paul Curtis. That these books become these touchstones, that these books are what allow us to remake ourselves when we are going through broken places. So, sorry, I feel really strongly about this, and I feel really strongly about the work that you're doing, and I feel really grateful that you're doing it. I feel really grateful to be part of this community that is making this happen. It means a lot to me. So, when I write stories, I write about belief. When I write stories, I write about possibility. When I write stories, I write about hope and courage and philosophy and faith and family and friendship and this great, teeming, beautiful, unknowable earth, this boundless universe, this beating heart. I write about all these things together. When I write stories, the broken pieces of my soul are whole again. It is my hope, my great hope, that I can share that wholeness with someone else, a reader, a listener, someone to share the story. We live in a world that is tricky and sinister and inexplicable and gorgeous and wonderfully, wonderfully odd. Aren't we lucky?